do like I'm basically calling it cookie. Hey guys, and welcome back to Morgs Menu. So today is going to be the first video of a kind of cooking 101 series, is kind of what I think I'm going to call it, of just giving some tips and tricks on how to get started with cooking, just some tips for those of you who maybe have just started cooking and are really new or are beginners, or if you're someone like me who's been cooking for several years and could take some of these tips and implement them into how you cook. It's really for those people who are kind of look at cooking as something that can be scary, which it definitely can, and I definitely, even today, like when I try new recipes and stuff, it can be scary to try new things because you're really scared that you're going to spend all this time cooking something and then it won't be edible at the end. So I thought I would do a kind of a series of just some things that I personally have learned just from kind of being a sort of self-taught in cooking. I think I mentioned in like my very first video that I grew up cooking with my parents and stuff like that, but really since like I went off to college, and mostly really after I graduated college, I started just kind of like finding recipes, cooking, trying new things. So I figured I'd just share with you some of the things that I've learned along the way, just in case you are someone who doesn't cook currently but would like to get starting into it. I want to do lots of different videos in this series, but of course I want to get your guys' feedback on things that you want to see yourself, for maybe things that you personally struggle with. So definitely leave me comments if you have any video ideas for me to include in this series. I definitely want to do, you know, just general tips and tricks for beginners, tips on meal prepping, planning out your meals for the week, how to be more budget friendly with cooking. So lots of different ideas are going on in my head, but definitely share some more with me in the comments so that I can, you know, if I have some knowledge on it, I can help you out with. So today's video is really going to focus on things that you do before you even start cooking whatsoever. Before you ever, you know, put a pan on the stove or start anything, you know, all of the things that you can do to help yourself have a successful end result meal before you even start cooking. So with that being said, I have 7 things to kind of go over today, so let's get started. So tip number 1, which isn't really a tip, but just something that I just wanted to start the video with, is don't be scared to fail. Obviously, if you haven't cooked a lot before, even if you have, like I said, and you're starting and trying a new recipe, it can be really scary. And, you know, some people just are so scared to fail that they don't ever want to try it. And that really comes with anything in life. So I'm not trying to like preach to you or anything like right now, but especially with cooking, it's not going to be something that you can, even if you're watching all of my videos and you're reading stuff online and whatever the case is, you can't really get good at cooking until you're practicing it. I almost view it kind of like a sport. Like you can watch football all day long on TV, you can read all the things that you are supposed to do, but until you actually practice it, or you know, whatever sport it is, until you actually practice it, you're not going to be good at it. Obviously this video and the upcoming videos are going to give you some tips and tricks on how to prevent you from failing, but number 1, just don't be scared. Worst case scenario, you try a recipe, it doesn't turn out well, and you just have to order out like you were going to anyway, or eat the frozen pizza that's already in your freezer. Just have a backup plan or whatever the case is, but just don't be scared to fail, because you're gonna have to fail a couple times to learn from your mistakes in order to get better. Just get started with cooking so that way in a couple of months you feel comfortable and you can be cooking much more exciting recipes than maybe something you're starting with. All right, number 2. Now, one big way that you can help prevent that failure from happening is to start with a recipe. Don't try and go rogue and think of some recipes that maybe your parents made for you growing up, or you've had at someone's house, or you've had at a restaurant, whatever it is. Don't think that you can just figure out the ingredients that you need in your head, figure out how to cook it in your head, and throw it in a pan. Unless you already have a bunch of cooking knowledge, you're not going to be able to just whip up some amazing meal without like following at least some sort of recipe. You might like X, Y, and Z vegetables and meats and whatever together, or separate, but sometimes throwing them together do not work. So just start with a recipe. It'll make your life a lot easier. Number 3, when you're looking for that recipe to start, don't start too complicated. I was definitely This was definitely something I struggled with at first because I would go on Pinterest or I'd see a tasty video or whatever the case is and I'd be like, oh, I want that for dinner. And I'd go to the store and I'd buy the stuff and then I'd go and try and do it and it would just be an epic failure. And that was because I wasn't trying to cook based on my abilities. Just with anything, like I said, with sports, you're not going to start on some expert level team if this is the first time you've ever stepped the foot on the field. So definitely start small. Again, the tasty videos, no matter how easy they look when they're fast forwarded and done by some professional and edited and blah, 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 no matter how easy they look, make sure when you're looking at it, if you open up a recipe and it has more than like 10, maybe 15 at the most ingredients, skip past it. Do not start with that. If you're not, really, really new to beginner and you have, a pretty good base of cooking, sure, go for those recipes. But if you're brand new to cooking altogether, or this is a brand new recipe, don't try and do some recipe that has 20 steps and 20 ingredients and you've never heard of half of them and you don't know what to do, because you're just gonna overwhelm yourself, you're gonna get stressed out, and it's just not a way that you're gonna be able to create an edible meal. So start with very simple recipes. I share a lot of those on my channel personally, but you can also find so many recipes now on Google, Pinterest, literally anywhere. Start with very simple recipes. That way you can kind of work your way up to those more complicated recipes, because the biggest goal here is to make something edible. And if you get a simple recipe and follow those instructions, you're most likely going to be able to at least make something that's edible. It might not be the best thing you've ever eaten, but if your goal is edible, start with a simple recipe and that'll make your life a lot easier. Tip number 4, once you have that recipe, that simple recipe pulled out that you want to try, make sure you have the correct cooking utensils to use them. There's nothing worse than picking out what seems like a simple recipe and you go to cut an onion and you realize you only have butter knives. Or you make this really good soup and it actually tastes delicious, but all of your spoons have slots in them and you can't serve it. Make sure you just have the tools that you need for that recipe. The best thing really that I personally think you can do is just go and kind of invest in just a staple set of utensils. Get a couple different spoons, spatulas, cutting boards, some decent knives. You really don't have to spend a lot of money on them. Especially when I first graduated college and was just like figuring out how to budget my money and everything, I bought a lot of my starting stuff from the dollar store. They typically have a big selection of just basic spatulas, measuring cups, all that kind of stuff, and you can find all of that there, or Target, Walmart, those places of course have them too. And you know me, I'm a big proponent of just ordering everything off Amazon, and you can buy stuff there too. So they have a lot of different options, but if you're on a low budget or just don't want to spend a lot of money because you're not sure if you're going to even like cooking, start with just going to a dollar store and getting a couple things. That way, when you go to start cooking and you start, you see this recipe that you have all of the tools that you need in order to create that recipe. Tip number 5. So this is actually something I recently discovered when I actually started my YouTube channel. One thing that I've struggled with before is I'll be in mid-recipe and know I need to add an ingredient, and I go to try and find it in my cabinet and it's hidden somewhere, it's fallen over, it's fallen back behind something weird, and I can't find the ingredient, and then all of my stuff's happening and this is burning and blah, 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 and it can be really stressful to try and find that one ingredient that's somehow hiding. So pull out all the ingredients that you're going to need for that recipe before you even start cooking. I started doing this for my YouTube channel just so I could show you guys kind of that clip and tell you, you need X, Y, and Z for this recipe. And then I started realizing that made my life so much easier when I was cooking, especially if you have other things going on around in your kitchen or other people coming in and out of the kitchen, whatever the case is. If you already have all your ingredients set out on your counter, it makes your life so much easier because, again, you're not going to be scrambling in the cabinets. You're not going to be freaking out that you can't find something. Everything's already set out. It also helps you prevent from forgetting to put ingredients in, because a lot of times it's happened to me. I'll get, I'll think I'm almost done and I'm like, oh, I forgot these 2 spices because they were sitting on my counter where all the other ingredients were, and I could at least throw them in last minute. Maybe they didn't go in the perfect time, but they at least made it in the recipe because they were sitting out and I knew I needed to use them. The only thing I would say is if like you're using frozen stuff or you're doing some recipe that takes a lot of prep and there's a lot of time before you're gonna be able to use something that needs to stay really cold, then yeah, maybe don't take that out of the fridge just yet. But the bulk of it, especially spices and things like that, even if it's, some sort of cheese or whatever, most of that stuff is fine sitting on your counter for 20-25 minutes before you actually use it. It's not going to hurt it. So pull everything out that you can, and it'll just make putting the whole recipe together much easier. Tip number 6, we're moving on to secondhand here. Make sure you're doing all of the prep that you need before you start cooking as well. I'm very famous for thinking that, the recipe is going to need some sort of sauce. I can whip that together while X, Y, and Z is happening on my pan, and then the sauce takes an extra 3 or 4 minutes than you thought, and then things are happening. Prep what you can before. Don't try and, if you're not very comfortable cutting vegetables or whatever the case is, don't try and do that in the middle of the cooking process. Do all that beforehand. It might extend, the amount of time your recipe takes at first until you get better and more comfortable. Again, if you're brand new to cooking, just after you pull all your ingredients out, prep everything that you can, and that'll make your life so much easier. When you need to put your onions in the pan, they're already chopped and diced. When you need to throw this sauce in or throw this meat in, it's already cleaned, it's already ready to go. So just do all of those little things beforehand. It makes your life so much easier when everything is ready to go before you actually start. And then the last big tip that I have, which is one of the most important probably, to have a successful recipe and meal altogether, is to plan out how you're going to cook each piece of the recipe or meal before you start. By that, I mean, say you have a recipe for a specific main dish that you're making, but you're roasting some vegetables or boiling some potatoes or whatever, making some rice, whatever you are doing for your side dishes. Maybe that stuff you don't necessarily need a recipe for because you've done it before, but you didn't really think ahead, okay, well, this needs 20 minutes or this needs this minutes, and so you're getting through your recipe and your main dish is going well, you have about 5 minutes left and you realize, oh no, I didn't cook anything to go with it. Plan that beforehand. It literally takes 1 or 2 minutes. If you take a look at your recipe, especially recipes online, they're going to say, X amount of prep time, X amount of cooking time. If you can sit here and say, okay, well, if this recipe is supposed to take me 30 minutes and my rice takes me 20, set a reminder on your phone, or if you're someone who really likes lists, make a list. Say, okay, I'm going to do this part of the recipe. At step number 4, I'm going to put my rice on, or whatever the case is. Just plan ahead before you even start the cooking process so that you know that you can have everything finishing at a similar time so you don't end up with really hot rice and potatoes and a cold main dish. All right, so that is going to conclude everything that basically you need to do up until the point of which you start cooking. So don't forget, don't be scared to try it. Start with a recipe, plan ahead, prep ahead, and pull out everything you're going to need, and you will have a much more successful chance of having a good recipe than if you just try and wing it or try and just figure out what to do in the moment. Cooking can be very stressful. I fully acknowledge that, but if you make a plan ahead of time and really go at it with a game plan of cooking this recipe, even if it only takes 30 minutes, it's going to make your life so much easier and have a much more higher successful rate than if you just try to do your own thing. So I hope you enjoyed today's video and it was helpful for those of you who are just scared to get started. Again, I'm going to be doing more videos similar to this one. I'm definitely going to be doing one for tips and tricks during the actual cooking process and then another one for after. I already have it kind of like planned out of everything that I wanted to say, but I wanted to like break it out into different portions of the cooking process so that this video isn't an hour long. So stay tuned for more videos, and again, if you have any video ideas, make sure you leave those in the comments down below. If you're new here and haven't yet subscribed, make sure you go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss out on any of the videos that I post on Wednesdays and Sundays. Thanks again for watching Morgs Menu, and I hope you have a great day. Bye guys.